Hey guys, tonight we're sliding straight into a banquet that never really ends. A long table shimmering with oil lamps, goblets sweating with wine, and that low, unsteady hum of laughter that makes the air feel warmer than it should. You're standing right there, barefoot on a marble floor that's sticky with spilled honey and grape juice, and you can already tell this isn't just dinner, it's an initiation. Somewhere down the table, a figure laughs too loud. Hair tangled, eyes like candle flame, and even though you can't see his face clearly, you already know it's Dionysus. You probably won't survive this, but hey, at least he'll go out with good wine. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and your local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You reach for a cup. It's heavy, carved with ivy leaves, and the liquid inside glows faintly gold, as if it remembers sunlight from some lost hillside. The musicians shift from flutes to hand drums, the rhythm pulsing like a heartbeat too big to belong to one body. Across from you, someone whispers that Dionysus doesn't just bring wine, he brings the permission to feel everything at once: joy, sadness, beauty, ruin, and to call it celebration. It sounds poetic until you realize that's exactly what's happening around you. People laughing and crying in the same breath, hugging and arguing and forgiving without any pause in between. Wine before wisdom, that's how the god works. Before mortals learned to philosophize or write constitutions, they learned to ferment. Somewhere in a Bronze Age cave in Greece, someone left a bowl of crushed grapes too long in the heat, and something miraculous or mildly suspicious started bubbling. Historians still argue whether the earliest wines were accidents or experiments, but either way, that first sip changed everything. You don't invent poetry or politics before you figured out how to make an evening stretch a little longer. There's an old myth that Dionysus was born twice, once from his mortal mother Semele, and again from Zeus's thigh after lightning took her out of the picture. Talk about a rough childhood. But think of it, rebirth stitched into his DNA. No wonder he couldn't sit still. He wasn't built for calm dinners or polite conversation. Every time you think he's settled, he bursts out of something: a womb, a vine, a mountain, or a song. That's why his feasts feel alive. They're rehearsals for resurrection. A servant pours more wine, and you notice it's darker now, richer, more fragrant. You swirl it and catch the scent of figs, smoke, and something that might be lightning if lightning had a smell. Somewhere near the door, a philosopher is already trying to categorize this feeling: pleasure, intoxication, divine mania. But Dionysus just smiles. He doesn't need definitions. He's the loophole between them. Here's a mainstream historical fact to ground you. Ancient Greek banquets, or symposia, were structured events. The guests reclined on couches, conversation followed specific themes, and drinking was measured by rounds, each guest mixing wine with water in precise ratios. Moderation was the law of the evening, but every law invites a rebellion, and Dionysus was that rebellion incarnate. Where the symposium tried to intellectualize desire, his feast set it free. He didn't dilute the wine, he diluted the distance between God and human. You take another sip, probably too much, and suddenly, the lamp seemed to sway even though the air is still. Someone laughs behind you, a rich sound, half affection, half warning. You turn and catch a glimpse of a leopard lounging near the table leg, its tail twitching like a slow metronome. Nobody else seems surprised. This is the first sign that the banquet isn't happening in any one place. You're in a myth and a memory simultaneously, in an Aegean palace and your own imagination. A quirky tidbit drifts through your wine-hazy brain. Some ancient winemakers supposedly sang to their barrels, believing melody could improve fermentation. Whether that's chemistry or superstition is up for debate, but it fits Dionysus's mood. Sound turning into substance, laughter into intoxication. Maybe the song changed the molecules. Maybe the molecules changed the singer. That's the kind of circular logic the god loves. The night deepens. People start moving, slow at first, then faster, as if they're chasing the rhythm rather than keeping time with it. Dionysus walks, glides between them, draped in a robe that looks woven from grapevines and dusk. He doesn't command attention, he absorbs it, like a black hole of charisma. You realize his power isn't in making people drunk, it's in convincing them that the boundaries they live by were never real. He hands you something, a cluster of grapes still cool from shadow, and tells you to taste. When you do, the sweetness hits so sharp it almost hurts, like biting sunlight. Around you, the laughter peaks and crashes again. A woman recites a poem that makes no sense but feels true. A man drums on the table with a rhythm that might outlast empires. It's messy and holy and alive. Historians still argue whether Dionysus's cult was imported from the East or homegrown in Greece. Some trace him to Thrace, others to India, some even to Egypt. The truth's probably tangled, like most divine family trees. But every theory agrees on this. He was always the outsider who walked in uninvited and somehow made everyone glad he came. That's why he doesn't sit. He's never of the table. He's the motion that keeps it from collapsing into still life. Another toast rises, this time to the God who gives and takes our wits. The phrase rolls around the room like a wave, and you can't help but join in. There's a giddy recognition in that contradiction, how losing control can sometimes feel like finding your true rhythm. Dionysus watches, amused as mortals pretend they invented that idea. He's patient about it. Eternity leaves room for irony. Somewhere near the end of the hall, someone drops a lyre string, and it snaps with a sound like thunder in miniature. For a second, everything freezes, the music, the laughter, even the air, and in that pause, you feel the god's pulse thrumming through the floor. It's not rage exactly, it's motion waiting to happen. The feast resumes, louder now, as if the silence embarrassed everyone. You realize that Dionysus's refusal to sit still isn't arrogance, it's empathy. To sit is to observe, to move is to join. He doesn't hover above the chaos, he dances inside it. You can't worship him from a distance because he erases distance by existing. Even the philosophers, those great champions of reason, eventually soften in his presence. You overhear one mutter that maybe ecstasy is a form of knowledge too. He's right, though he'll never admit it sober. By the time the torches burn low, the room smells like laughter and smoke and the edge of tomorrow. Dionysus has vanished. Or maybe he was never just one figure, but the electricity that passes from hand to hand, cup to cup, heart to heart. You lean back, dizzy but calm, realizing that this god of motion isn't leading you to madness. He's teaching you to keep moving, even when the music stops. Outside, dawn blushes over the hills. The feast has ended, or maybe it's just changed form. Somewhere in the distance, vines curl up their trellises, chasing the light like worshippers. You take the last sip from your cup, and for the briefest moment, you taste both the sweetness of grapes and the ache of something ancient that refuses to stay still.
The next evening starts before you even realize it ended. You blink, and the marble floor melts into grass, cool and dewy under your feet. The same hum of voices drifts through the twilight, but now it's open air. The banquet's moved outside. Or maybe it was always here, waiting. You look around for Dionysus and spot him instantly, because he's the only one not reclining, not leaning, not pausing to breathe between stories. He's pacing like a thought that won't settle down, circling the tables, brushing shoulders, laughing, whispering, stealing figs and giving them away again. The god who hated chairs, someone murmurs beside you, and it clicks. He's not restless in the way mortals are restless. His body seems to obey a different tempo, a rhythm that makes stillness feel like suffocation. You watch him and realize that if he ever did sit, the entire world might lose its pulse for a second. It's not arrogance, it's physics. The banquet depends on him staying in motion, the way a fire depends on air. Someone offers you a stool. You shake your head. It feels rude to sit when the god won't. He notices, of course. His mouth tilts in amusement, eyes gleaming with the kind of knowing that's both flattering and terrifying. "Careful," he says softly. That's how it starts. You're not sure if he means worship or madness. Maybe both. A servant pours more wine. It smells different tonight, more honey, less smoke. The mixture shifts every evening, as though the recipe listens to the crowd's mood. A poet nearby claims it's deliberate, that Dionysus can taste emotion in the air and adjust the balance. Historians still argue whether ancient Greeks really mixed honey with their wine, or whether that's just a poetic exaggeration, but the sweetness coating your tongue feels real enough to make you believe anything. At the far end of the gathering, musicians are tuning up again. Flutes, lyres, a drum made from stretched goatskin. Dionysus drifts toward.
By now, you've learned that when Dionysus moves, the world rearranges itself to follow. One blink, one heartbeat, and the god is gone again, off toward the mortal world, his robe dissolving into the horizon like spilled ink. You follow, because standing still feels impossible after 2 nights in his orbit. The air thickens, marble becomes dust, divine laughter fades into market chatter. You're in a city now, ancient and alive, the scent of olive oil and goat stew replacing the sweetness of honeyed wine. Mortals bustle around you, oblivious to the faint shimmer that trails in your wake. They're setting tables, lighting torches, calling out invitations. You can feel it before you hear it. The next banquet has begun. This one is different. It's human, grounded by appetites and rent money, not lightning and prophecy. Yet somehow, Dionysus' pulse runs through it all. The same rhythm, the same hunger for motion. A group of young men carry amphora from a cart, each vessel painted with curling vines and half-naked dancers. The labels are crude but proud. From Naxos, from Thebes. You recognize those names. They're places the god supposedly wandered after his rebirth, teaching mortals how to make wine and, more importantly, how to let go. A storyteller sitting on a low wall is already spinning tales for anyone who'll listen. He says that Dionysus once disguised himself as a mortal and wandered into a village feast. The locals laughed at his wild hair, mocked his delicate hands, and refused to share their food. When the wine they had hoarded turned to vinegar and their goats stopped giving milk, they finally realized who they'd offended. By the time they fell to their knees, he was gone, leaving only vines tangled around their houses. Historians still argue whether such myths reflect moral lessons about hospitality or veiled warnings against arrogance, but you can't shake the sense that every banquet since then carries an echo of that first mistake. The tables here aren't marble. They're rough wood, carved with initials and burn marks. The cups don't match. Someone's roasting lamb, and the smell wraps around the square like an embrace. There's no orchestra, just a flute player trying to keep time with her own laughter. And yet, as you move among them, you feel the god everywhere, in the crackling fire, the clink of cups, the way every conversation eventually slips into song. You take a seat on a stone step. Yes, you, not Dionysus, and it's almost scandalous how good it feels to rest for a second. A woman beside you passes a bowl of figs. "You're new," she says, not as a question. You nod, still tasting the air for divine interference. "Don't worry," she adds, "he always shows up eventually." And he does. You don't see him arrive. He's just suddenly there, in the crowd, blending like wine into water.
He looks less like a god tonight and more like a wandering musician, barefoot, smiling, carrying a tambourine with bells that catch the firelight. The mortals don't flinch or bow, they just make space. He dances, of course, but it's different here. Smaller, closer. He moves like one of them, like he's learned their limits and decided to respect them just enough to make them forget he's limitless. He teases the flute player, clinks cups with strangers, flirts shamelessly with the baker's daughter. When someone complains that the bread's too dry, he dips it in wine and hands it back with a wink. Everything tastes better in motion. That line earns him laughter and eye rolls, but it sticks in your head. You realize he's teaching again, not through commandments, but through rhythm. Mortals think they're celebrating harvest or victory, but Dionysus is teaching them something else, that joy isn't the reward for life, it's the proof you're still living it. Mainstream historical fact time. The Greeks held symposia not only for pleasure, but for education. Men, and yes, mostly men, gathered to discuss politics, philosophy, and poetry between drinking rounds. They debated virtue over diluted wine because moderation was supposed to distinguish civilization from barbarism. Yet somehow, over centuries, the lines blurred. By the time of the Hellenistic era, the symposia had turned wilder, more inclusive, more musical, more emotional. The spirit of Dionysus seeped in through the cracks of structure until intelligence and intoxication were indistinguishable. The quirky tidbit tonight: archaeologists once found tiny clay wine cups shaped like animals, foxes, donkeys, even one shaped like a shoe. Scholars think they were party jokes, meant to spill wine if held incorrectly. Imagine that, 3,000 years ago, someone at a banquet giggling as their friend accidentally poured wine down their own tunic because the god of mischief demanded it. You can almost hear Dionysus laughing in the background, pleased that even in clay, mortals couldn't help but play. You notice something curious as the night deepens. Every time the music swells, the edges of reality seem to shimmer, like heat haze. The baker's daughter spins too fast, and for a second, her shadow splits into two. One human, one something else, crowned in ivy. Then the drum beat changes, and the shadow merges back. You blink, unsure if the wine is to blame, but Dionysus catches your eye, and that sly, knowing grin says, "You saw it. Good." Historians still argue whether the ecstatic dances of his followers, the Maenads, were literal possession or symbolic liberation. Were they truly touched by divinity, or simply expressing emotion beyond societal restraint? You suspect Dionysus would find the debate adorable. For him, the distinction never mattered. He isn't about belief, he's about experience. The divine, he'd tell you, is what happens when the body forgets where it ends. You're drawn into the circle. The flute wails, the drums deepen, and suddenly you're dancing. Not the polite shuffle of a guest, but the reckless, bone-deep motion of someone who's forgotten why they started. Around you, mortals become more than mortals. One man's laughter turns into a chant. Another's tears glisten like dew on his beard. Nobody asks permission to feel, they just do. Dionysus moves through the chaos, a conductor without a baton, and somehow everything stays balanced. Someone breaks a jug. Instead of stopping, they scoop the spilled wine into their hands, smearing it across their faces, laughing like children. The air smells like sweetness and salt, earth and smoke. The line between sacred and sloppy is gone, and nobody misses it. Dionysus stops near you, tilts his head and says, "You see it now?" You nod. He grins wider. "Good. Mortals always think they invented pleasure. I just remind them they didn't." The night rolls on, timeless. The stars above flicker like droplets of wine on dark silk. Somewhere, someone starts retelling an old story. How once Dionysus turned a band of pirates into dolphins when they tried to kidnap him. You can almost see it, the ship creaking, sailors diving overboard as vines sprout from the mast. Historians still argue whether that tale symbolizes justice or divine intoxication. But as the crowd erupts into laughter, you realize it doesn't matter. The story survives because it moves, because it dances from mouth to mouth just as the god does. When the fires finally die, you find yourself sitting on the ground, dizzy but calm. Dionysus has vanished again, leaving only a faint trail of crushed grapes behind him. The mortals clean up, humming softly, smiling with that exhausted bliss unique to people who've tasted something they can't explain. You stand, stretch, and look around. The world feels heavier now, more real, as if the god's departure returned gravity. But part of you, some small pulse behind your ribs, keeps swaying to the rhythm he left behind. The banquet may end, but the movement doesn't. You realize you're already waiting for the next one.
You wake up to the sound of argument, soft at first, like bees murmuring in a field, then sharper, more deliberate. The feast has shifted again, from the open night to a shaded courtyard in Athens. Marble columns frame the scene. Olive trees lean overhead, whispering secrets to the breeze. The smell of wine lingers, but the tone has changed. Gone are the laughter and songs of peasants and wanderers. Here, voices are measured, deliberate, shaped like debate. You've stumbled into a symposium, the kind of intellectual banquet where ideas are served in courses, and Dionysus, for once, is both the topic and the uninvited guest. Philosophers recline on couches, their robes arranged just so. A slave mixes wine and water in a crater, because even thinkers know the brain needs lubrication. The host raises his cup. To moderation, he declares. Everyone murmurs agreement. You can almost hear Dionysus laughing somewhere beyond the walls. Moderation. What a fragile word. You don't see him yet, but you feel him. A faint hum beneath the polished composure, the twitch in a philosopher's hand as he resists tapping the rhythm of the flutes. The god is never far from his own discussions. The conversation begins politely enough. What is pleasure? What is wisdom? Is joy divine, or does it lead to ruin? The old men trade polished sentences like chess moves, confident in their rationality. You sip your wine and wonder how long they'll last before passion breaks their careful order. Mainstream historical fact. The Greek symposium wasn't just a party. It was a civic institution, a kind of moral laboratory. Men debated politics, ethics, art, and love while reclining and drinking. Even Plato used it as a literary stage. His symposium begins at such a feast, where Socrates and others discuss love's nature. Ironically, the one god they praise most, Eros, is a cousin of Dionysus, another reminder that intellect and desire were never as separate as the philosophers wanted. You spot a figure in the corner, someone too relaxed to belong here. He's leaning against a column, hair tangled, eyes bright. No one seems to notice him yet, though the torches flicker more when he shifts his weight. You suppress a grin. Dionysus has arrived, invisible to those who refuse to see. A young philosopher, eager to impress, starts railing against indulgence. Pleasure is the enemy of virtue, he insists. A man enslaved to his senses cannot know truth. He gestures broadly, spilling a drop of wine on the marble. You see Dionysus tilt his head, amused. The god lifts his fingers ever so slightly, and the spilled drop crawls upward, back into the cup. No one else notices. You almost laugh out loud. Then the god whispers, not in your ear, but through the air itself. They think sitting still makes them wise. The words hum through the courtyard like a chord too low to hear, but truth dances. It always has. You take another sip, and the room tilts a little. Maybe it's the wine,
Or maybe it's the weight of that sentence. One of the older philosophers raises a counterpoint. And yet, he says, ecstasy gives men visions. Prophets and poets are never sober when they speak the language of the gods. He gestures toward a sculptured bust of Apollo nearby. Even the orderly ones know inspiration is fire, not formula. The table murmurs. You can feel the god smile, pleased to have at least one accidental ally. Historians still argue whether Plato's dialogues secretly praised Dionysian frenzy under the guise of rational debate. The idea that madness could be divine, that to lose control might be a higher state of understanding, haunted philosophy for centuries. Then something strange happens. The air thickens. A flute begins to play, faint but distinct from somewhere outside the courtyard. The philosophers pause, frowning. One of them stands, craning his neck. "Who plays music at this hour?" he demands. No one answers. The melody seeps through the walls, curling around their arguments like smoke. Dionysus steps forward at last, pretending to be a servant carrying a fresh jug of wine. No one questions him. He refills cups with that lazy grace of someone who knows exactly how this will end. The youngest of the philosophers notices him and says, "You, pour carefully. We debate serious things here." The god smirks. "So serious you forgot to taste." A few men chuckle, thinking it's wit. But then he starts speaking softly, weaving his words into the melody floating in from outside. "You talk of truth as if it sits still, but truth moves. It sways like vines in wind, laughs like rivers, changes shape when you blink."
You blink, and the courtyard of philosophers dissolves into shadow and silk. The marble fades beneath your feet, replaced by dusty wood planks that smell of sweat, candle smoke, and imagination. A faint murmur rises around you, an audience settling into their seats. You followed Dionysus again, but this time you're inside something new, a theater. The air itself feels alive. You can sense the pulse of anticipation, the quick hush before stories bloom. Torches flicker, painting gold across painted masks hanging on the walls. Each mask wears an exaggerated expression, joy stretched too wide, grief frozen mid-sob. The performers, waiting behind a thin curtain, whisper prayers, not to Apollo, the god of order and reason, but to Dionysus, their patron of performance, their unseen director. He's here, of course, though not as an actor. You spot him lounging high above the stage, reclining in the shadows of the rafters, eyes glimmering with mischief. He looks perfectly at home, as if the entire theater were just another form of his body. Each stage light a vein, each line of dialogue one of his many voices. The flute begins. A single note quivers, and you feel that same familiar hum run up your spine. The curtain parts, and the first actor steps forward. His mask enormous, his robe trailing. His voice echoes strangely, amplified by some trick of architecture the Greeks perfected long before microphones. "O Dionysus, Lord of the Vine, forgive our trembling feet!" The crowd murmurs reverently. The god above only smirks. Here's a mainstream historical fact. The origins of Greek theater are deeply tied to Dionysian festivals, particularly the city Dionysia of Athens. Every spring, playwrights competed with tragedies and comedies performed before thousands. The performances were both civic duty and sacred rite. The audience wasn't just entertained, they participated in collective catharsis, emotional release through story. The play unfolding before you tonight is about him, naturally.
A mortal king who bans worship of Dionysus, only to discover, too late, that repression always invites rebellion. You know the story. The audience knows it. But that's the trick with Dionysus. Every retelling is new because every emotion hits slightly differently when you're in motion. The actors dance, chant, and stumble through their lines. Behind them, musicians strike drums that echo like distant thunder. The chorus, masked and robed in ivy, sways in time with your heartbeat. For a moment, it feels less like you're watching theater and more like the world itself is performing for him. Dionysus leans forward, amused. They call this art, but really, it's confession. They put on masks so they can finally tell the truth. He's right, of course. The masks, so stylized and distant, somehow make the emotions feel sharper. When the actor cries, the audience does too, because the exaggeration frees them from embarrassment. Nobody has to admit which part of the story is theirs. A scholar sitting beside you, sandals dusty, scroll clutched too tightly, leans over and whispers, "It's fascinating, isn't it? The use of the chorus as moral commentary, a communal conscience." You smile faintly. If only he knew that the communal conscience he's admiring was designed by a god who thrives on losing control. Historians still argue whether the first plays evolved from ritual dances in honor of Dionysus, or if his cult merely adopted them later. Some say actors were once priests in disguise, their performances half prayer, half possession. Others claim theater emerged when humans realized they could mimic divinity and survive. But you've seen Dionysus's grin. You suspect the truth lies somewhere between both extremes. Maybe he invented theater just so mortals could practice being multiple people at once. And speaking of multiple, tonight's quirky tidbit, ancient Greek actors were all men, even in women's roles. They used padded costumes, elaborate wigs, and, most importantly, those famous masks. Some of those masks were painted with tiny holes in the mouth that actually amplified sound. Ancient acoustical engineering, done in service of myth. You can't help but imagine Dionysus chuckling at the irony, mortals building technology to better imitate madness. As the play deepens, something shifts. The tragedy on stage begins to mirror the world off it. The actor playing the king cries out, "I have bound joy itself!" And a sudden gust of wind sweeps through the open-air theater. Candles flicker, a few go out. The crowd gasps. You look up. Dionysus isn't in the rafters anymore. He's on stage. At first, no one notices. He blends in perfectly, barefoot, robed, face painted like the rest. But then he moves, and every line, every gesture of the other actors seems to bend toward him. The rhythm of the play shifts subtly, the drum beats aligning with his heartbeat. You can feel it in your own chest. The chorus falters mid-line, confused. One of them stumbles, glances his way, and freezes. You can see recognition dawn. Terror, then awe. The audience leans forward, not sure if it's part of the show. Dionysus catches your eye and raises a finger to his lips. Don't ruin it. He takes a single step forward. The whole stage seems to breathe. Then, softly, he improvises. What is theater, if not a banquet for ghosts? The line isn't in the script, you know it, everyone knows it. But the words slide perfectly into place, as if they were waiting for centuries to be spoken. The actor playing the king falters, then laughs, a strange, cracked sound. "Who are you?" he asks, forgetting his lines completely. Dionysus smiles. I'm the reason you remember them. The audience erupts, not in applause, but in something stranger. Gasps, laughter, murmured prayers. For a heartbeat, everyone knows exactly who he is, and then just as quickly, they forget again, filing it away under theater magic. Historians still argue whether ancient audiences believed the god literally appeared during performances, or if they accepted it as artistic illusion. Either way, you've seen how thin that line really is. The play resumes, barely. The actors stumble through the ending, now more possessed than performing. When the curtain finally falls, the audience rises to its feet, trembling. You can hear people muttering blessings as they leave, unsure whether they've been entertained or converted. Backstage, Dionysus lounges among props, spinning a discarded mask in his hand. "Funny thing about masks," he says. "Mortals wear them to hide, but gods wear them to show." He presses the mask to his face. It's the grinning one, of course. And his voice changes, lighter now, echoing through the empty space. "You can learn a lot from pretending." He tosses the mask aside and looks at you. "They call this theater. I call it practice." "For what?" you ask. "For being more than one thing at a time. For living between." You nod slowly. The noise of the dispersing audience fades behind the stage wall. Outside, night has taken full hold. The stars sharp and cold. You feel the pulse of the city. The philosophers still arguing in courtyards, the lovers whispering by fountains, the farmers dreaming of their vineyards, all of them in some way still part of his performance. As you leave the theater, you catch your reflection in a bronze shield leaning against a column. For a split second, the face staring back at you isn't entirely yours. There's ivy at the edges of your hair, a hint of gold in your pupils. You blink, and it's dawn. But the echo remains, a faint rhythm in your chest, a whisper in your ear. Every life is a play, and every play is a prayer. You realize the banquet hasn't stopped, it's just changed costumes again. The theater air lingers in your lungs, scented with smoke and something wilder. When you exhale, it's not marble dust that leaves you, it's pine resin and night wind. You're no longer in Athens. The laughter of the crowd fades into crickets, cicadas, and a low hum that feels older than words. The ground beneath you softens from stone to soil. Ahead, torches snake upward through the dark hills like a constellation spilled sideways. You follow them. The night feels too alive, every sound swollen with pulse and promise. Branches twist into strange gestures overhead, and somewhere close, a flute wails, half melody, half animal cry. You stumble on a root and catch yourself on a tree that seems to breathe under your hand. That's when you see them, the maenads. They move like flame. A circle of women in fawn skin cloaks, hair tangled with ivy and serpents. Their bare feet stamp the dirt in hypnotic rhythm, beating time for a song that doesn't need words. Wine sloshes in clay cups. One woman breaks hers on a rock and lets the shards glitter in the firelight like stars. You realize she's bleeding, but she doesn't seem to care. Or maybe she can't tell the difference anymore between blood and wine. At the center of their storm, Dionysus sways. Not dancing, exactly. More like conducting the pulse of the world with his fingertips. His crown of vine leaves catches embers, glowing faintly. His laughter spills like thunder that forgot to be threatening. You edge closer, careful not to startle anyone, though you suspect no mortal sound could interrupt this frenzy. The maenads are lost in it, spinning faster, eyes glazed, voices rising in something that's part hymn, part scream. The ground itself seems to thrum. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Maenads were the female followers of Dionysus, central to his cult rituals. Ancient sources describe them as ecstatic dancers who roamed the mountains, celebrating with wine, music, and symbolic acts of wildness. Their rituals, known as theosai, were said to bring liberation, though not without danger. Many stories tell of men who tried to spy on or interrupt the rites and met unfortunate ends. You don't plan on being one of those men. Still, curiosity wins. You crouch behind a bush, watching as the ritual deepens. The Maenads raise their hands to the sky, and Dionysus lowers his head as if listening for something underground. When he moves, the torches flicker in unison. You can't tell whether the rhythm commands the dancers or the dancers command the rhythm. A fringe tidbit bubbles up from your memory. Some scholars believe the Maenads' trances were aided by rhythmic drumming, dance, and possibly fermented honey known as mead, spiced with herbs that might have mild hallucinogenic effects. You wonder what that drink would taste like, probably like forgetting your own name, but not minding. One Maenads breaks from the circle and walks straight towards you. Her eyes catch the firelight, brown but shimmering as though with molten gold. You freeze. She smiles. Lost? She asks. Maybe, or late. Then you're right on time. Before you can protest, she grabs your wrist and drags you into the ring. The air thickens instantly. The ground tilts. The rhythm grabs your spine and shakes you like a maraca. The others laugh, welcoming you without hesitation. Someone presses a cup into your hand. You hesitate, but Dionysus glances over, and that smirk, that eternal smirk, tips the scales. You drink. The world tastes purple. Your vision blurs, not from dizziness, but from too much movement, each Maenad multiplying in your sight, their limbs weaving impossible shapes. The flute merges with the drum with the heartbeat, and your feet begin to move even though you don't tell them to. It feels like remembering something your body knew before your brain was invented. You dance. Not gracefully, not intentionally, but honestly. At some point, you realize the night has split into two layers, one where bodies whirl and shout, and one beneath, quieter, where meaning hums like an undertone. Dionysus stands between them. He looks younger now, almost human, the kind of beauty that doesn't belong to a single gender. He tilts his head back, lets the moonlight pool in his mouth like wine, and laughs. Historians still argue whether the Maenads' ecstasies were literal or metaphorical, whether they physically tore animals apart as the myths say, or if those stories were moral exaggerations told by later writers uncomfortable with female freedom. Maybe both. But standing here, sweating and shaking, you understand why the stories endure. The wildness isn't cruelty, it's release. They dance to dissolve the walls between themselves and everything else. Dionysus catches your eye. Don't look for meaning. It'll find you. You're about to respond, but the words dissolve in your mouth. The music shifts again, slower now, more deliberate. The Maenads form a spiral, hands linked, moving inward towards Dionysus. You're swept along until you're only a few steps away from him. The air grows colder near his skin, as if he carries a piece of twilight with him. He reaches out and places a cool hand on your forehead. "You're too still," he murmurs. "Banquets bore you. That's good. Stillness is for statues." Then he presses a vine leaf to your lips. It tastes faintly of sap and smoke. In that moment, everything else falls away. The noise, the fire, the smell of crushed grapes. You're standing in a quiet clearing, alone except for him. The stars overhead seem to breathe with you. "This is why I move," he says softly. "If I ever sit still, the world stops spinning. Creation freezes. Art dies. Love curdles." His gaze sharpens, playful again. "Besides, Have you ever seen anyone look dignified spilling wine while seated? You laugh despite yourself. He joins you, and the sound feels like music breaking open. Then the drums return, pulling you back into the dance. Time folds strangely. You can't tell if minutes pass or hours. The maenads blur into motion, their joy something terrifyingly complete. You catch glimpses of faces that aren't faces, foxes, lions, even your own, multiplied across time. For a moment, you swear the trees are swaying in rhythm too. When the ritual finally ends, dawn stains the sky a pale rose. The maenads collapse where they stand, exhausted, their laughter fading into the rustle of leaves. Dionysus stands among them, untouched by fatigue. His hair glows faintly in the new light. He looks at you one last time before vanishing into the woods. No farewell, no parting words, just a grin and a gesture, like a promise that this won't be the last dance. The wind picks up, carrying the faint scent of wine and pine resin. You're left barefoot in the dirt, heartbeats still echoing the rhythm of the night. Somewhere behind you, a broken cup catches the sunrise and flashes like gold. You realize you're smiling, and you understand, stillness was never the goal. The banquet isn't something you sit at, it's something you move through.
You wake to sunlight pressing against your eyelids like a gentle accusation. The night of the maenads has evaporated, leaving behind a faint ache in your muscles and the ghost of drums in your bones. You stretch, expecting forest air and birdsong, but instead, you inhale the perfume of roses, cinnamon, and something metallic. You open your eyes to marble once again, but not Greek marble. This is smoother, heavier, drenched in empire. Rome. You're lying on a couch draped in embroidered fabric, gold thread glinting along the seams. Around you sprawls the kind of luxury that whispers, "We conquered the world for this." Silver trays, fruit piled high, a harpist in the corner, plucking half-heartedly, while a servant pours wine from a jug shaped like a satyr. You're at a banquet again, of course. But this time, Dionysus isn't the center of the room. He's the theme. His statue dominates one wall, grapes carved with obsessive realism, ivy curling up stone ankles. Yet the god himself is nowhere to be seen. It's as if the Romans have invited his image, but not his presence. You sit up slowly, and a woman beside you, hair pinned in gold, eyes like amber glass, smiles. "You were asleep when the emperor arrived," she says casually, nibbling on a fig. "Don't worry, he's used to latecomers." You glance toward the head of the table. There he sits, a man with the air of someone who expects the gods to stand when he enters. His robe gleams crimson, his cup overflows, and every time he laughs, everyone else laughs louder. He raises his glass. "To Bacchus." The room echoes, "To Bacchus." Ah, you think, so they've changed his name. Here's your mainstream historical fact. When Dionysus crossed into Rome, he became Bacchus, a more domesticated version of his Greek self, at least on paper. The Romans absorbed him into their pantheon, but quickly discovered his festivals could get problematic. The Bacchanalia, as they called them, were originally small, secret rites of ecstatic worship, but by 186 BCE, they'd grown so wild, reports of political conspiracies, orgies, even treason, that the Roman Senate tried to ban them. You sip from your own cup, sweet, too sweet. The wine tastes like a performance. All pleasure, no risk. Across the table, two poets argue in hushed Latin tones. "Bacchus inspires genius," says one. "Without him there is no art, no courage, no empire." The other scoffs. "Without him there is only chaos. Ask the Senate." You grin into your cup.
The same argument century after century. Joy as salvation versus joy as threat. The woman beside you leans closer. "Don't believe either of them," she whispers. "The emperor keeps Bacchus on a leash. They call it refinement. I call it fear." She gestures toward a mural behind her. You turn to see it. Bacchus, Dionysus, painted reclining on a couch, cup raised lazily, surrounded by tamed panthers and neatly dressed maenads. Their eyes are downcast, obedient. You whisper, "They've put him in a chair." "Exactly," she says, "and they think that means they've won." A musician begins a slower tune. Dancers enter, 2, maybe 3, veiled, graceful, perfectly choreographed. Their movements echo the frenzy you remember from the mountain, but reduced, sanitized, beautiful in the way marble statues are beautiful, too cold to move. You feel it immediately, something wrong beneath the glamour. The rhythm is missing its heartbeat. You murmur, "He's not here." The woman tilts her head. "Who?" You don't answer. You already feel the shift. The air thickens. The harpist's notes wobble. A breeze curls through the open colonnade, smelling faintly of pine and old laughter. The emperor frowns, glancing around as if the wind has insulted him personally. Then a shadow slips through the doorway. Barefoot, cloaked in ivy, eyes bright as spilled wine. Dionysus walks into Rome like he never left. The dancers freeze mid-step. The harp string snaps. The emperor starts to rise but finds his knees won't obey. You watch as Dionysus strolls past trays of food, pausing to steal a grape, a sip of wine, a glance. The painted maenads on the walls seem to stir, their eyes lifting toward him. He stops beside you, plucks the fig from your hand and grins. "You again," he says. "I was wondering when you'd show up," you reply. "Had to let them get comfortable first," he says, glancing around. "Mortals only appreciate freedom once the leash starts to choke." The emperor clears his throat. "Who dares—" Dionysus interrupts with a raised hand. "Don't. You'll ruin the mood." He turns to the room, addressing no one and everyone at once. "You built an empire out of roads and rules, and yet here you are still pretending you can sip eternity from a cup." A few guests laugh nervously. The woman beside you hides her smile behind her hand. The god continues, "They renamed me Bacchus. I don't mind. But names are chairs, aren't they? They make you think you can rest." Historians still argue whether the Roman Bacchanalia truly were as scandalous as reported, or if the Senate exaggerated the chaos to justify repression. Maybe the rituals were subversive, threatening political order. Maybe they were just too joyful to control. Either way, Dionysus's energy, the refusal to sit still, terrified bureaucrats. The emperor forces a grin. "My people honor you with restraint, with dignity." Dionysus laughs, a sound that shakes the wine in every cup. "Dignity is just fear in formal wear." Then he lifts the emperor's golden chalice, swirls it once, and pours the wine onto the marble floor. The liquid spreads like a crimson map, seeping toward every guest. "Drink this instead," he says softly. "It's called truth." The room falls silent. You feel something stir, an invisible ripple, faint but unmistakable. The air smells of grapes crushed underfoot, of rain after drought, of possibility. Someone giggles, then someone else. Laughter catches like wildfire, Servants abandon their trays, poets leap onto tables, the musicians, startled, switch to a wild rhythm that sounds suspiciously Greek. Even the emperor hesitates, then shrugs and joins in. You realize what's happening. The banquet has lost its script. The god of wine doesn't sit. He moves through the chaos, whispering to each guest, turning restraint into rhythm. You dance again, not as a worshiper this time, but as a witness. Rome tries to contain him, but he seeps through the cracks, blooming wherever life remembers it's temporary. A quirky tidbit drifts through your head as you spin. Roman mosaics often depicted Bacchus riding a chariot pulled by tigers or leopards, symbols of his untamable nature. Some historians think the imagery was meant to warn against excess. Others suspect the Romans secretly adored that danger, like flirting with fire. Dionysus appears beside you mid-turn, laughing. You see, even empires dance eventually. You nod, breathless. For how long? He shrugs. Until they think they've tamed me again, then we start over. As dawn creeps into the colonnade, the guests collapse in heaps of silk and laughter. The emperor snores softly, crown askew. The woman beside you leans her head on your shoulder. Dionysus stands at the threshold, already half shadow. Before he disappears, he glances back and says, "Remember, banquets end, but rhythm doesn't." You blink, and he's gone again. The harpist plucks a hesitant string, the sound trembling in the quiet aftermath. Wine stains the marble like constellations. Somewhere, a servant starts sweeping, pretending not to notice the ivy sprouting between the tiles. You stand, still dizzy from motion, and realize that every civilization tries to make him sit still. Greece called him divine chaos. Rome called him entertainment. But either way, he always finds a way to get back up.
You blink again, and centuries peel away like stage curtains. The marble halls fade into cobblestone streets glistening with rain. You're standing in Florence now, lanterns swinging gently, perfumed air thick with ink, oil paint, and ambition. Somewhere, a lute is tuning up. Somewhere else, a monk is writing a warning about sin. You recognize the smell of the Renaissance, brilliance and guilt brewed in equal measure. The wine in your hand is darker now, aged and knowing. You take a sip and taste history, sweet, bitter, and just a bit pretentious. Art blooms on every surface. Frescoes, statues, even tavern signs boast divine bodies caught mid-motion. But there's one figure that keeps reappearing. Languid, wild-eyed, clutching grapes. Dionysus again. Only now he looks suspiciously like the artists who paint him. Human, exhausted, beautiful. You wander through a workshop lit by late afternoon gold. A young man, barefoot, splattered with pigment, glances up from his canvas. "You're in the way of the light," he says. His accent rolls like warm honey. "Sorry," you reply, stepping aside. "Who are you painting?" He gestures toward the half-finished figure on the canvas. A pale boy crowned in ivy, eyes glazed in drunken clarity. "They asked for Bacchus," he says, "but I think he looks more like me." You smile. You're not the first to think that. Here's your mainstream historical fact. During the Renaissance, Dionysus, by then firmly known as Bacchus, became a favorite subject for painters like Titian, Michelangelo, and Caravaggio. He represented both divine inspiration and dangerous indulgence. The church tolerated him as myth, but artists adored him as metaphor. He was the permission slip they needed to explore passion, movement, and imperfection.
The painter dips his brush, hesitating. "They say he's a god of wine, but I think he's a god of excuses," he murmurs. "Every time I paint him, I get away with something I shouldn't."
The glow of Florence's lamps fades, replaced by a throb of neon. The air hums differently now, electric, humid, alive with static and sound. You blink, and centuries of marble and oil paint melt into asphalt slick with spilled beer and glitter. The Renaissance has given way to nightlife. You're standing at the edge of a music festival, a sea of bodies moving like a single breathing organism. LED screens flash colors that have never existed in nature, and the bass line hits you square in the ribs. For a moment, you think it's too much, but then you recognize it. The rhythm, the same one from the mountains, the theater, the Roman feast. Dionysus never stopped moving. He just traded flutes for subwoofers. The streets are almost empty when you find yourself walking again, not toward home, but toward the quiet edge of the city where the horizon still remembers how to blush before dawn. Your pulse hums with leftover music, a ghost rhythm that won't quite fade. The soles of your feet are sore, your hair smells faintly of smoke and sugar, and your mind is stretched thin between centuries. You reach a small park. Nothing special, just grass slick with dew and a few benches under tired lampposts. But you know, before you even sit down, that Dionysus won't be using the furniture. He's there, barefoot in the damp grass, watching the sky brighten. No stage lights this time, no gold crown, just a loose shirt, an easy stance, and that same wild stillness that's never quite still. You stand beside him in silence for a while, listening to the birds trying out their morning scales. He finally speaks. You made it all the way through the banquet. You laugh quietly, if that's what this was. Oh, it's always a banquet, he says, stretching. Every sunrise is the hangover after creation. You glance at him sideways. So why do you refuse to sit still? Everyone else seems desperate to. He smiles, faint and knowing. Because sitting still is how the world petrifies. Motion is what keeps it soft enough to dream. The air is warming, but you still feel a shiver. He looks at you, eyes reflecting the faint orange of sunrise. You humans built whole philosophies around stillness, control, discipline, serenity. You forgot that chaos can be holy, too. You think of the philosophers you met, Plato frowning into his wine, Stoics meditating their way out of joy, Renaissance painters trying to trap motion in canvas. You think of the festivals and the raves, the centuries of dance, the stubborn rhythm that outlived every empire. You were never the god of wine, you said quietly. You were the god of not freezing. He grins. Exactly. The wine's just a prop. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Ancient festivals of Dionysus, like the Anthesteria in Athens, were among the few times social order reversed. Slaves could speak freely, citizens wore masks, and rules bent into laughter. Historians still argue whether these moments preserved the system or threatened it. Dionysus never cared which. He only wanted movement. The sun clears the horizon, and light spills across the park, turning every dew droplet into gold. Dionysus turns toward it, squinting like he hasn't seen it for a while. You humans built whole philosophies around stillness, control, discipline, serenity. You forgot that chaos can be holy, too. You figure of the philosophers you met, Plato frowning into his wine, Stoics meditating their way out of joy, Renaissance painters trying to trap motion in canvas. You think of the festivals and the raves, the centuries of dance, the stubborn rhythm that outlived every empire. You were never the god of wine, you said quietly. You were the god of not freezing. He grins. Exactly. The wine's just a prop. The banquet never ends, he murmurs. It just changes playlists. The Greeks had flutes, the Romans had drums, you have Spotify, but it's all the same song. You sink onto the grass beside him, and when the song stops, he shrugs. Then you start it again. Even silence has tempo. There's a calm now, soft and long like an exhale that's been waiting all eternity. The city around you yawns awake, cars starting, birds louder, coffee machines hissing like distant snakes. The world resumes its spin, oblivious to the god in its park. A fringe tidbit floats into your head. Some 19th century scholars claim Dionysus was secretly the same as Christ, a misunderstood symbol of divine suffering and renewal. Others called that idea heresy. Historians still argue whether that comparison reveals truth or just human need. Dionysus, predictably, seems amused by the whole thing. He stands, brushing dew from his jeans. They always argue, he says.
They're afraid of what happens if they admit joys as sacred as sacrifice. He looks down at you, sunlight haloing his hair. "Don't stop moving," he says softly. "Even when you rest, let your thoughts sway a little. Let them breathe." You nod, unsure whether to thank him or bow. He chuckles, sensing it. No need for formality. Just dance sometimes. That's enough. He starts walking toward the light, every step dissolving him a little more until he's just shimmer and warmth. For the first time, you notice that even his shadow ripples, not cast, but flowing like liquid rhythm. Then he's gone. You lie back on the grass, watching the clouds stretch into shapes that could be faces, could be laughter. Somewhere, faintly, you still hear a drumbeat, not loud anymore, just enough to keep the world from stopping. And maybe that's why Dionysus never sat still at banquets, because every time the music ended, someone had to remind the universe to keep breathing. You close your eyes. The rhythm continues beneath your pulse. The banquet hums on, everywhere and nowhere, waiting for its next willing dancer.
The tempo softens now. The world around you slows to a hush, like a record easing off the turntable. You can feel the echoes of everything, gods, laughter, centuries, drifting into stillness, not as an ending, but as a pause. The grass beneath you is cool again, the kind that bends instead of breaking. The air carries no wine, no music, just the quiet after a long song when everyone exhales together. You feel lighter now, maybe even a little emptied, like a glass turning on its side. That's all right. That's what the dance was for. If you listen closely, you can almost hear Dionysus somewhere far away, chuckling softly, content, not restless, because you finally understood. His refusal to sit wasn't defiance, it was care. Motion is how he blesses the living, keeping every cell from turning to stone. Your breath syncs with the rhythm he left behind. Inhale, exhale. A tiny sway of ribs, the simplest dance in the world. The sunrise folds over the city like silk. Cars start to hum again, doors click, coffee steams. Life resumes, ordinary, sacred, moving. You smile, eyes still half closed, knowing that motion itself is a form of prayer. When you open them again, the park is empty. But you feel a pulse in the earth beneath you. The god is gone. The rhythm stays. And now, it's yours.